All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Hidden Observer. My name is Sean. We're going to embark on a little bit of a analysis, a critique. We're going to put democracy, so to speak, through the ringer. A lot of people like to prop democracy up on a pedestal and proclaim that it has, not too many errors. But I want to be able to give us many examples throughout the course of history of many eminent thinkers. We're talking about authors, critics, pundits, intellectuals, statesmen, either contemporary or throughout the course of history, where people have had relevant and justified critiques, essentially put democracy in its place and gave it a certain lens with which to consider going forward in the future. A lot of people like to live under the auspices or the safety that they believe democracy provides them. They don't seem to see the internal rot that is being produced by essentially a runaway form of democracy. Career politicians that are targeting their piece of the pie, let's say. They want to be able to plunder this system because it's so easy to take advantage of and exploit. We'll bring up some examples here. If we look at H.L. Mencken, he's quoted as saying, "As democracy is perfected, the office of president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be adorned by a downright moron." And that's coming from his book on politics, A Carnival of Bunkum. So essentially, he's absolutely correct in making the assertion that the inner soul of the people is what is ultimately being projected onto these demagogues, these people that are selected to be the representative form of party politics. So you have these people put in places of power, and essentially they're ostensibly running your government, but at the same time they are just essentially managers of these countries, these Western nations. It's not hard to find plenty of examples where downright morons have been the order of the day. Let's move on to Ray Bradbury, the author of Fahrenheit 451, who goes on to say, "Oh God, the terrible tyranny of the majority. We all have our harps to play, and it's up to you to know with which ear you'll listen." So he's basically harping on the tyranny of the masses in this statement. He's doing it in a cynical fashion, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense. Conservatives versus liberals, your Democrats versus Republicans, these two-party system political divisions that are represented by the right and left wing, which of course now are representative of extreme left and extreme right opinions. These systems of two-party system politics have essentially morphed into a single party of ruling power, because there's really not much difference between the conservative opinions and the liberal. We're not even talking about classical liberalism. Democrats, the progressives, right-wing and liberal left-wing policies and agendas are marching towards the same destinations. Let's move on to Winston Churchill, former British statesman. "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others." And, again, he's taken a jocular position here to basically throw democracy under the bus, but at the same time, he's not far off the truth when he's mentioning all the other forms of government. Let's move on to Howard Zinn. "Protest beyond the law is not a departure from democracy. It is absolutely essential to it." So he's making a good point that despite being under the umbrella of democratic politics, it's still, to be the most effective citizen within that form of government, obviously you have to take advantage of your constitutional rights and the principles to be able to protest with vehemence against policies that are asinine or inane or completely off the rails. We're going to move on here to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who says, "The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerated the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself, that in its essence is fascism. Ownership of a government by an individual, by a group, or any other controlling private power. So there it comes from FDR, who's mentioning that if you do want to live in your entitled democracy, you cannot become apathetic to the point where you allow that institution, that state power, to become such a behemoth, such a festering growth, to the point where the ownership of government is now taken over by corporatocracy. So all the private financing and fundraising, all the collusion with private power. If you start to see that occurring within your government, obviously you're starting to notice that it's becoming crypto-fascism. Fiction writer, with his famous book 1984, we have a quote coming from George Orwell: "To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which cancelled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again and at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly forget it again. And above all, to apply the same process to the process itself." That was the ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. To what he's exactly getting at here, he's speaking of cognitive dissonance, how society seemingly gets into an ever so encroaching form of contradictoriness. You accept lies, you accept, subtle little word manipulations, and allow yourself to be essentially hoodwinked. And you're constantly under the trance of this type of hypnosis. It's self-hypnosis, but it's also externalized as well. So you're battling a very crafty form of trickery and wordplay. He was in fact formulating the truth in these quotes. To another quote coming from H.L. Mencken, Notes on Democracy. "Democracy is a pathetic belief in the collective wisdom of individual ignorance. No one in this world, so far as I know, and I have researched the records for years and employed agents to help me, has ever lost money by understanding the intelligence of the great masses of the plain people, nor has anyone ever lost public office thereby." So yeah, he's speaking the absolute truth there. When you have a mass of society that has been succumbed to decades of degenerative public education, to the point where your average citizen, there's another quote out there somewhere: if you want to understand what democracy represents, just have a 5-minute conversation with your average voter and you will understand precisely what they don't know. Let's move on to, we have a quote coming from Noam Chomsky from his book Media Control: The Spectacular Achievements of Propaganda. And he says, "Propaganda is to a democracy what the bludgeon is to a totalitarian state." So yeah, he's basically mentioning what we all know. We know that propaganda is being utilized. We know that there is absolutely a magical power to words and terms and the craftiness of the language and the repetitive nature of the language, and yet everyone is highly vulnerable to it. It takes many, many years to disentangle yourself from the Gordian knot of being propagandized and weaponized. He understands the utilization of linguistics and how cunning this language can be. You no longer have to stomp the boot on the necks of your plebs of society and dominate by absolute will to power, by vicious violence. The media conglomerates and the legacy media that all these nations have employed in their favor to continue to perpetuate the absolute onslaught of propaganda. So we're going to move on to his next quote here. Neoliberal democracy, instead of citizens, it produces consumers. Instead of communities, it produces shopping malls. The net result is an atomized society of disengaged individuals who feel demoralized and socially powerless. In sum, neoliberalism is the immediate and foremost enemy of genuine participatory democracy, not just in the United States, but across the planet, and will be for the foreseeable future. A very illustrating quote here. He's mentioning how the citizenry is basically enamored by the act of consumption, by hypermaterialism, by, they're completely disengaged people. They're not involved in the democratic process. They have no idea about the inner workings of their government. So let's move on here. We have Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, and he says, "I do not know if the people of the United States would vote for superior men if they ran for office, but there can be no doubt that such men do not run." So in the history of democratic nations, you very rarely see superior intellectual men, people of high moral character, high integrity individuals running for positions in governance, productive, creative, and just highly respectable human beings that want to be in these positions of power. Again, we're going to go back to Winston Churchill in, I believe, a collection of his speeches in Peace and War. Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Again, he's kind of reiterating what he had previously said in his previous statement, but here he kind of makes an admission here. So he's admitting here that at the base level of humanity, you have individuals that are, imperfect beings and are prone to mistakes, a sociopathic part of society that's going to be attracted to these governmental structures. Let's move on to another quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. "Democracy extends the sphere of individual freedom. Socialism restricts it. Democracy attaches all possible value to each man. Socialism makes each man a mere agent, a mere number. Democracy and socialism have nothing in common but one word, equality. But notice the difference. While democracy seeks equality in liberty, socialism seeks equality in restraint and servitude." So he's basically making the comparison between democracy and socialism. As much as people want to seek and try to attempt to attain this utopian notion of equality for all humanity, ultimately we live in a world where equality doesn't exist. There's no two human beings that are precisely alike, no two personalities that are exactly alike. There's nothing in nature that's exactitude in likeness. You look at two trees, there's no two trees that are the exact same. There's no two snowflakes that are the exact same. There's no two grains of sand on the beach that are the exact same. So this idea of equality is anathema. There's absolutely no way that we can live in a world where equality is going to be bestowed to every single person on the earth. Ultimately, we're equal under the laws of natural law. As a human being, we exist in the universe. There's our equality. So we're going to move on to a quote from John Adams. "I do not say that democracy has been more pernicious on the whole, and that in the long run than monarchy or aristocracy. Democracy has never been and never can be so durable as aristocracy or monarchy. But while it lasts, it is more bloody than either. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. It is in vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avaricious than aristocracy or monarchy. It is not true, in fact, and nowhere appears in history those passions the same in all men under all forms of simple government, and when unchecked produce the same effects of fraud, violence, and cruelty. When clear prospects are opened before vanity, pride, avarice, or ambition for their easy gratification, it is hard for the most considerate philosophers and the most conscientious moralists to resist the temptation. Individuals have conquered themselves, nations and large bodies of men Never. Wow. Yeah, he's an advocate of the former versions of government, which were in many of the philosophers and intelligentsia of the past. Although they found monarchies and aristocracies to have their own forms of degradation and pestilence and corruption and signs of human frailty in the psyche and aberrations, ultimately you have democracy, which was far down the list of any of these ancient philosophers. Allegedly a Socrates and a Plato, they pretty much put democracy in last place because they knew ultimately the tyranny of the masses. Going to move on to Alexander Fraser Tytler. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years. These nations have progressed through this sequence from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, and from apathy to dependence, from dependence back into bondage. You basically have this man breaking everything down. He understands that once democracy degrades into the largesse, the donations, the handouts, fully ensconced and involved in to write policy regarding economics and to basically distribute those resources however they see fit, create new institutions, new structures, donate in any philanthropic way that they want, that the people, the masses deem fit. So this is what you get: acquisition of, let's call it decadence or affluence, and eventually you become lazy. All right, we have a quote from a lady, Simone Weil. Whether the mask is labeled fascism, democracy, or dictatorship of the proletariat, our great adversary remains the apparatus, the bureaucracy, the police, the military, not the one facing us across the frontier of the battle lines, which is not so much our enemy as our brother's enemy, but the one that calls itself our protector and makes us its slaves. No matter what the circumstances, the worst betrayal will always be to subordinate ourselves to this apparatus and to trample underfoot in its service all human values in ourselves and in others. That's an incredible quote as well. She understands that democracy turns into an absolute behemoth. The apparatus, as she's referencing here, talks about the bureaucracy. It's an all-encroaching bureaucracy. They have the resources to enable them to create any structure, any institution, and become a domineering force. We ultimately betray ourselves. We essentially throw human values, traditions, and integrity out the door. All right, we have Larkin Rose with his enduring quote: "Politics is the art of using euphemisms, lies, emotionalism, and fear-mongering to dupe average people into accepting or even demanding their own enslavement." Crafting this quote here in his book, every individual's Stockholm syndrome to their own governments, allowing themselves to be easily led down the path to their own enslavement. They fall prey to all the euphemistic language, all the lies, all the propaganda, the emotionalism, pulling and tugging on people's heartstrings, the fear-mongering, as we just mentioned, regarding, some new catastrophe that comes up, the sophistry that you see in politics. Another quote coming from Larkin Rose: "I'm not scared of the Maos or the Stalins and the Hitlers. I'm scared of the thousands of millions of people that hallucinate them to be quote-unquote authority, and so do their bidding and pay for their empires and carry out their orders. I don't care if there's one loony with a stupid mustache. He's not a threat if the people do not believe in authority." Although they are lunatics and psychopaths, if they didn't have the support and the pillowing of society that's propping them up and believing in their message, we're propping these people up. In other words, Hitler was voted into power. He wasn't installed necessarily. He may have been installed as a initial candidate, but ultimately his propaganda piece with Goebbels, they convinced society to vote for him as the savior messiah in that case. Let's look at a quote from Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail of 1972. The main problem in any democracy is that crowd pleasers are generally brainless swine who go out on a stage and whoop up their supporters into an orgiastic frenzy, then go back to the office and sell every one of the poor bastards down the tube for a nickel apiece. Wow. You got these politicians that will absolutely whip up a frenzy. They will sell it to the masses. The masses will buy it up because obviously it's the most emotional based rhetoric. Moving on to Frank Zappa. The illusion of freedom will continue as long as it's profitable to continue the illusion. At the point where the illusion becomes too expensive to maintain, they will just take down the scenery, they will pull back the curtains, they will move the tables and chairs out of the way, and you will see the brick wall at the back of the theater. And that, in its essence, is what you very well may see here in contemporary culture. The illusion, the stage theater, will be dismantled. The mechanisms in place, like the Federal Reserve System, which everyone can see, the economic system is extremely destabilized. Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. Human beings act in a very great variety of irrational ways, but all of them seem to be capable, if given a fair chance, of making reasonable choice in the light of available evidence. Democratic institutions can be made to work only if all concerned do their best to impart knowledge and encourage rationality. But today, in the world's most powerful democracies, the politicians and the propagandists prefer to make nonsense of democratic procedures by appealing almost exclusively to the ignorance and irrationality of the electors. If you break it down, he's talking about the psychological aberrations of society that are all-encompassing. He was one who projected that we wouldn't necessarily have the totalitarian dictator state. We would probably move towards a more altruistic form of inverted totalitarianism, to where you would be succumb to the psychiatric technocratic state, the manipulation, the propaganda, the satiation with the psychotropic drugs. Moving on to Terence McKenna. Not to know one's true identity is to be a mad, disensouled thing, a golem. And indeed, this image, sickeningly Orwellian, applies to the mass of human beings now living in the high-tech industrial democracies. Their authenticity lies in their ability to obey and follow mass-style changes that are conveyed through the media. Immersed in junk food, trash media, and crypto-fascist politics, they are condemned to toxic lives of low awareness, sedated by the prescripted daily television fix. They are a living dead, lost to all but the act of consuming. Terence McKenna, coming from Food of the Gods, calling it fairly Orwellian, but I believe he would have been more of a proponent of the Aldous Huxley model, prescripted pharmacological methodology that would be enacted, forced down your throat by a form of demagoguery. We have a quote here from Reinhold Niebuhr. Rationality belongs to the cool observer, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith, and the naive faith requires necessary illusion and emotionally potent oversimplifications which are provided by the myth maker to keep ordinary persons on course, highly illustrating the irrationality of the average citizen in society. Anti-psychological. They don't understand the methods to which they are controlled. We're going to move on to Henry Wallace. Still another danger is represented by those who, paying lip service to democracy and the common welfare, in their insatiable greed for money and the power which money gives, do not hesitate surreptitiously to evade the laws designed to safeguard the public from monopolistic extortion. Their final objective, toward which all their deceit is directed, is to capture political power so that, using the power of the state and the power of market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in external subjection. They claim to be super patriots, but they would destroy every liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. They are patriotic in time of war because it is in their interest to be so, but in time of peace they follow power and the dollar wherever they may lead. a very all-encompassing quote, the holy tenets of democracy. And they'll pay lip service to that when it serves them, and they know that they have an entire populace that is subjected to their whims. They claim to be super patriots, but they slowly start chipping away at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and usually by executive orders or by orders in council, by some other form of secret, stroke of the pen. The average person will not be able to detect how those freedoms, which were fought and died for, you wake up one day and you no longer have it. I'm going to move on to C.S. Lewis in his essay, Present Concerns. And this man is a proponent of democracy, as he states here. I am a Democrat, he says, proponent of democracy, because I believe in the fall of man. Very Christian, religious man. I think most people are Democrats for the opposite reason. A great deal of democratic enthusiasm descends from the ideas of people like Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed in democracy because they thought mankind so wise and good that everyone deserved a share in the government. The danger of defending democracy on those grounds is that they're not true. I find that they're not true without looking further than myself, he says. I don't deserve a share in governing a hen roost, much less a nation. The real reason for democracy is just the reverse. Mankind is so fallen that no man can be trusted with unchecked power over his fellows. Aristotle said that some people were only fit to be slaves. I do not contradict him, but I reject slavery because I see no men fit to be masters. He likes the structure of society. He wouldn't want to have that opportunity to govern a nation of men and women. Integrity, so much moral compass to be able to direct an entire nation and tell them how to live and operate. Moving on to Isaac Asimov, a Russian fiction writer. There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there has always been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. He's hitting on the notion that he's recognized an anti-intellectual trend. He sees the deterioration in public education in America. The university system has been co-opted, littered with, self-professed Marxist professors that are espousing principles and tenets of Marxism within the Western democratic nation that was built on principles of freedom and justice and morality and a Judeo-Christian ethic. He understands that the cultural values are being slowly eroded. Ignorance is being housed in parliamentary seats, and that it's a slow drip-feed method of deterioration. We're going to take a quote here from Mahatma Gandhi. What difference does it make to the dead, the orphans, and the homeless, whether the mad destruction is wrought under the name of totalitarianism or in the holy name of liberty and democracy? So Gandhi even recognized that democracy, for the essential fraud that it is, it's just a slow, soft, creeping form of socialism, a soft variant of communism, and the tyranny of the masses. Liberty and democracy are talismans, and they're used as terms to satiate the populace. Most people in these societies do not honor actual, true, sovereign freedom. They want to be led. Let's look at a quote here from G.K. Chesterton, the everlasting man. If there was one fact we really can prove from the history that we really do know, is that the despotism can be a development, often a late development, and very often indeed the end of societies that have been highly democratic. A despotism may almost be defined as a tired democracy. As fatigue falls on a community, the citizens are less inclined for that eternal vigilance which has truly been called the price of liberty, and they prefer to arm only one single sentinel to watch the city while they sleep. Making a very prophetic statement, he recognizes the despotism that is creeping within the halls of democratic governments. He knows that they can slowly erode from within due to inherent nature of the immorality within the body politic, can start the internal rot. He defines it here as a tired democracy. So again, we hearken back to the affluent society. We understand that affluence creates comfort and laziness. they don't have the same strivings that they once had. And so the vigilance level starts to wane. Let's move on to a couple quotes from Hans Hermann Hoppe. With a democratic government, anyone in principle can become a member of the ruling class or even the supreme power. The distinction between the rulers and the ruled, as well as the class consciousness of the ruled, become blurred. The illusion even arises that the distinction no longer exists. With a public government, no one is ruled by anyone, but everyone instead rules himself. Accordingly, public resistance against government power is systematically weakened. While exploitation and expropriation before might have appeared plainly oppressive and evil to the public, they seem much less so, mankind being what it is. Once anyone may freely enter the ranks of those who are at the receiving end, consequently, exploitation will increase, whether openly in the form of higher taxes or discreetly as increased governmental money creation, quote unquote, inflation, or legislative regulation. This is a quote that could really be unpacked. The lines are blurred. The people can never truly decipher what it is exactly that you're accomplishing. You can make ambiguous statements and remarks, inordinate amounts of taxes, expropriating property, a repressive tyranny from within, whether that be, a creeping police state, unjust laws, criminal justice system. You have discrete misappropriation of funds, inflation within your central bank system, which is already extremely corrupt, incessant printing of money, which is obviously adding your M2 money supply, I guess, and you're adding to that perpetually, which is constantly devaluing each independent unit of that currency. So of course, that's where your inflation comes in. If the power of government rests on the widespread acceptance of false, indeed absurd and foolish ideas, then the only genuine protection is the systematic attack of those ideas and the propagation and proliferation of true ones. Wow, no truer statement has been uttered. You have widespread acceptance of false, absurd notions and ideas. So people have essentially been brainwashed. People hate to hear that term, but at the end of the day, everyone is easily succumb to brainwashing and techniques of persuasive, manipulative forms of thought and speech and rhetoric. We will move on to our final slide here, where we have a couple quotes coming from Jonah Goldberg, and I believe both of them are coming from his book, Liberal Fascism. The problem with saying the personal is political is twofold. You politicize what is personal. Everyone must celebrate my lifestyle, and you personalize the political. Your opposition to the minimum wage hurts my feelings. This is how you unthink yourself out of a civilization. When politics becomes a fashion choice and fashion becomes political, if you wear your politics on your sleeves, it usually means you don't keep them in your brain where they belong. This is a very illustrative example of how party politics loves to get involved in every single sentiment. Their interest in idea has to be put up on a pedestal, has to be celebrated. You're over intellectualizing your politics. There's many examples of recent political failures where people are, let's call it what it is, kicking the can down the road on many issues. They know that they're relevant, but they don't want to deal with them on that particular term. They sidestep it. Hopefully that doesn't become a failure. That's been going on for decades. The government cannot love you, and any politics that works on a different assumption is destined for no good. And yet, ever since the New Deal, liberals have been unable to shake this fundamental dogma that the state can be the instrument for a politics of meaning that transforms the entire nation into a village. And what I extrapolate from this quote would be, as a human being, as a man, as a woman, you cannot expect that your government is going to wholeheartedly take care of you in every facet of your life. You have to take some responsibility in providing yourself with meaning. You have to be your own independent thinker. And they do want to actually move you towards this global village, this utopia vision. If you're expecting politics of meaning, you need to instantiate your own meaning in your life. So that would be my mini presentation on democracy. I wanted to formulate some of my own thoughts. I wanted to read you some of these relevant quotes. Maybe you've glossed over a few of these quotes and never really truly tried to extrapolate the true meaning behind them. To finish this presentation,